What's up, agents, and welcome back to another Division video. We've been treated with some information this evening from the new Game Plus showcase. Don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. We're going to run down all the interesting details. I'll link the full interview down below in the comments because there's two interviews going around. This one that's quite a lengthy one at what, 23 or 4 minutes, and then there's one that's like a very short little version as well, and it's got quite a lot to cover. You can see here it's in chapters. There's a bit of an intro where Julian talks about his background, how he started out and how he got into, you know, essentially into the job that he is now. So I'll link it if you want to, you know, go and listen to that in a little bit more detail. It is pretty good. And then he talks about some core defining moments of the Division universe. And that's a little bit about launching the Division 1 and how they showed that first trailer and pretty much the hype went wild. And, you know, a lot of stuff that we already know, especially if you are a Division fan. And then they talked about fan feedback shaping the Division. And this one's only a very, very little bit. So we'll let this bit play out.
Fan feedback to has it changed the direction, or has it helped shape the vision at all of the Division?
Absolutely. There's no doubt that there's constant dialogue with members of the community. We have a special, you know, community group called the Elite Task Force. We have Discord with them. There's a lot of pre-release stuff shared with them. We're going to have a big session where we're going to bring these community members to Sweden, because we're based in the darkest area of the world in Sweden. It's great. I love it. It's been 12 years, so I really love it. We're going to bring them over here in February for, you know, some pretty cool, pretty exclusive stuff. You know, it'll be, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I am, because I'm the executive producer, so I've only got myself to blame at the end of the day. But they'll be playable of things that we've announced, and maybe even things that we haven't announced. So we're really going to extract as much feedback as possible from these very precious members of the community.
So yeah, a pretty big shout out to the ETF community there, with some pretty insane follow-up information, I guess, because it did get mentioned in a live before Christmas. I think Leo mentioned it, that they were going to do some kind of test session with the ETF at some point this year, and that's some pretty juicy info there. I think he went off script a little bit, I think, because obviously he did mention that. He mentioned February, which is definitely not too far away, and he also mentioned that there is the potential there for some unreleased stuff to be shown and played by these lucky select few that get to go. Next, they started laying the groundwork for Survivors. Now, the video editing in the background was a little bit random. What they were talking about didn't necessarily always line up with what they were talking about didn't always line up with what we were seeing in the background. But he gave a little bit of an introduction to Division 1 at this point and talked about the 3 DLCs that it had. But then started talking about how essentially Division 1 had the first extraction looter shooter, and that Survivors is essentially a follow-up to that. He then talks about obviously how it was a huge fan favourite and that the fans constantly still talk about it, and give a little bit of a rundown of what it was that you did. It was in New York, the weather was bad, you was injured, and you had to basically loot up and extract. He then obviously then mentioned, you know, at its core, it could have been PvE or PvP as well. But that was kind of enough that you wanted to hear at that point. We wanted to get into some juicier details when it came to Survivors. And the main message that he wanted to push here was that they can't rest on 10-year-old laurels, basically. They've got to put the effort in, they've got to reimagine it. And they did talk about that. They're introducing systems that that haven't been seen anywhere else. They want it to be groundbreaking. And then he went on to mention that they are literally redesigning and bringing that snowstorm to the entirety of the DC map. But obviously we get the impression that it's currently playable, and he said that it is really beginning to take shape. The interviewer tried to prod a little bit more out of him, but he wasn't really going to give anything else. Obviously, I think it's still being kept under wraps quite significantly, but he did give a shout out to Magnus Jensen, who obviously was a big part in the original Division 1 survival, and that, you know, he trusts in that vision that they want to create and kind of bring to Division 2. A few other little things on the weather and the systems moving forward with Survivors. He did go on to mention that they want to lean into how comfortable we are with the DC map, but then bring in changes to the map and also bring in the weather that will affect how we go on to play when we're playing Survivors, and make it have an effect on particularly our gameplay styles. Rather than talk over this point here, I kind of wanted this one to play out. He just got asked about taking inspiration from current, you know, market leading extraction shooters that are live right now. So for instance, Ark Raiders has obviously done very, very well. Survival was 10 years ago, and have they taken any inspiration from all these recent looter shooters to kind of put into what they are making with Survivors? And I just thought this was a pretty good explanation for what he did. So I'm just going to let this one play out.
I think we're always focused on how do we build on what we have and surprise ourselves. The industry moves so fast that if we take inspiration from this game or that game, I mean, that's really chasing trends. So we're really focused on how do we take what we did 10 years ago in survival, adapt that to the Division 2, adapt that to Washington, D.C., adapt it to a new audience, but also bring some brand new things that have really never been seen before.
Last question around Survivors. What's your big pitch for anyone? I mean, I'm sure people are going to play regardless, but what's your...
So yeah, that was that. I thought it was a pretty interesting answer, you know, especially when it turned around and he's talking about not chasing trends and really wanting to kind of set their own path when it comes to Survivors and what it is that they're creating. If you're wondering what he says there when he's talking about any advice for players now, he talks a bit more actually about new players at that point, saying that if you jumped in now and started to play, he would guarantee that, you know, this is a game now that is, you know, newbie friendly and that you would have a lot of fun. The interviewer himself had not played Division 2, he'd played Division 1, but he said, listen, if you buy it and you don't like it, he'll refund you. That's how confident he is in a new person jumping in to the game as of today. Just going back to Survivors, there was one thing I actually forgot to mention. He did talk about the kind of what is Survivors going to be, and essentially, you know, DC struck down with the world's worst blizzard of all time. You've got to get in, he mentioned valuable resources. You've got to collect up valuable resources and then extract, which essentially just sounds like, you know, your general looter shooter extraction kind of lore, I would guess. You know, that's generally the gameplay loop. But he put a nice spin on it, with it obviously being Division, and made it sound that little bit interesting. This is one other part of the intro I'm going to let play out because it's the part about the Division 3. As you can see, it's a very, very small part, but I'll let you get the word directly from Julian himself.
When do those points come to be?
So the Division 3 is in production, right? This is not a secret. It's been announced. It's shaping up to be a monster. I can't really say anything more than that, but this is within these walls in Massive. We are working extremely hard on something that I think will be as big an impact as Division 1 was.
I knew you were going to give me a line. The Division 3 is shaping up to be a monster. That's all I needed.
So yeah, the Division 3 is shaping up to be a monster. And I mean, that doesn't give us anything at all. Let's face it, it gives us absolutely nothing. But if they're really going for that, you know, this is it now. We've done 2 of these games. Let's come out with, you know, we've seen how successful Division 2 can be when we bring it back from pretty much death. So let's go all in. I'm really hoping that is the attitude that they're having, and it will turn out to be, you know, that monster that I think we've all wanted ever since we jumped into the division, you know, all them, well, nearly 10 years ago. Next, he talked about Resurgence. I'll give you a very quick rundown because most of this information you already know. He talked about how impressive the graphics were. He actually compared them to PS5 graphics. Now, I'm not quite seeing Resurgence looking that good, but he really did big it up. And then he talked about how the entire map is one great big social space. So unlike Division 2, where you only have your, you know, you're at the base of operations, you can see other players. Well, in Resurgence, the entire map is, you know, one great big social space. So you can run around the corner and you could see somebody fighting a cleaner, for instance, in that part of the Division 1 map that it's kind of had reimagined for the mobile game, which is pretty interesting. At that point, then you can always choose to team up with them if you want to. PvP's off by default. It does have its own PvP sections of the game. It has its own mode. It obviously has the dark zone and things like that. But yeah, it's a pretty, you know, if Division 3 has that, I think it will be, you know, it's crazy, crazy good. He next just kind of rounded off talking about the division in general and the 3 pillars of the division, which I think he said was open world, online, and RPG. And he said they kind of stick to them 3 pillars when they imagine what they're doing with, you know, from Division 1 to Division 2, and obviously, I guess, to Division 3 moving forward. But he did kind of give the indication, though, still that the main focus is always going to be PvE. That's definitely what it felt like. And although he did mention that, you know, they have PvP, they have the Dark Zone, it does kind of feel like, although I fully expect Division 3 to have PvP, I'm just not quite sure how focused in that will be, and if it'll ever be as focused in as people will want it to be when it comes to like it was for Division 1. You know, people still get excited to this day with Division 1 PvP when it got to that state where, yeah, it's actually really, really good. So, yeah, but way too early days to be guessing that. I just felt the 3-pillar answer that he gave did lean into more of a PvP space than it did to a PvP space. But who knows? Like I said, way, way, way too early to be judging or talking about anything like that. What was really interesting, though, they got asked one more question after that about kind of innovation and technologies and things like that. There was a little bit of a skip, so it's kind of like it got edited a little bit. But he did talk about Genshin Impact and how he's noticed that his daughter can play that game, you know, sat on the couch on one platform, and then somebody else can play it on an iPad, someone can play it on a PC, somebody can play it on a console. And there's no kind of monetization barriers to playing that multiplayer together. Now, I've never played Genshin. I know what kind of game it is. I know it's free to play, you know, with the monetary aspects and stuff and things like that. But what he was really getting at was how easy it was for all these platforms to come together, no matter whether you were playing on your couch, on your iPad, whether you were playing on your PC or your console, and how easy that was nowadays for somebody to just jump in the game with their friends, sat on their couch or whatever. So that kind of obviously leans into that space where you think they clearly want to make Division 3 accessible to absolutely everybody, absolutely everywhere, and hopefully that crossplay will finally arrive. But that is going to be it for the video. I think Julian was pretty open to saying maybe a little bit more than I thought he was going to. I was really surprised really with some of the answers. So it feels like Division 3 is well on its way. It feels like Survivors is well on its way. I know Division 3 is way, way far away, probably a couple of years, let's face it. But things are definitely moving in the right direction. And I'm definitely interested now, even more so, to see what comes out at the Japanese event early next week. It seems that we are probably going to get even more details that we are generally not expecting. So be sure to tune in for that. I'll have all the details as soon as I possibly can for you. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. As always, thank you for all the love and support, agents. I hope you found this useful, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.